Okay, awesome. So thank you guys for coming today. And we're going to go over a lot of common interview questions today and how to approach them. And I'll let my speakers introduce themselves today.
Hi, I guess I'll start. I'm Monica Jang. Nice to meet you all. So I'm right now a practicing physician. I'm actually at UCLA. I've interviewed for both the med school and the residency, so I've been on the other side, so I hope I can give you some good tips today. And I'm in internal medicine.
Hi guys, my name is Erin. I'm a current MS1, so I just went through the interview process for med school.
Awesome. So today we'll go over some common questions, how to best prepare for them, and some mistakes to avoid. So the first part that I'll hand over to Erin and Monica are we can start off by going, how do you guys prepare for these traditional questions, and how should students going through interviews approach them now?
So personally, I think it is helpful to prepare answers ahead of time. So I actually did gather common interview questions and literally wrote down what I thought would be the ideal response. And I noticed that in some of the questions submitted, a lot of people were worried that it would sound too rehearsed. But actually, when you're in the moment, it really doesn't. As long as you have something in your brain that you can take from when you need to speak on the spot. It's kind of like a safety blanket. And when you end up actually doing the interview, I've never really seen any applicant sound rehearsed, so I wouldn't really worry about that. And if you're really concerned about that, you can practice it enough to where you don't sound rehearsed.
Yeah, I'll second that. So I wouldn't, kind of like she said, I wouldn't write down like your paragraph like word for word. I'm going to memorize, this is my answer, this is exactly what I'm going to say. But have a couple bullet points, like she was saying, things in your head that you want to make sure that you're mentioning. And what you really want to do, we'll start with the first question with the tell me about yourself, which I agree is the hardest question. I know it's one that I dreaded. I don't know if you guys dread that one. But it's kind of like it's really just kind of like meeting someone. You guys don't know each other and you want to list a couple of things that maybe this person is like, oh, I'm interested in that, and they'll grab onto that and kind of continue the conversation. It's nothing too serious. It's really just your catalyst to give the other person something to go after with you. And yeah, so have a couple of pointers down for what you want to talk about. A big thing, definitely, like she said, is practicing with others. I've never been on the other side of being an interviewer for med school applicants, but I have done mock interviews with people. I have heard situations where they either sound too rehearsed or like they're trying to be too I don't know what the right word is, professional or robotic, but just be yourself. At the end of the day, they're just humans on the other side. And, you know, at this point, what I imagine, and at least in my experience, they don't seem to be thinking, how impressive is this person? How well spoken is this person? No, it's, do I like this person? Is this someone I could see being my colleague? If I see them in the hallway, do I want to, you know, chat with this person? So just be yourself.
Awesome. So, especially for the tell me about yourself, what aspects should the answer include? Should students mention medicine in there or some hobbies? What do you guys recommend?
Yeah, I think people get too nervous about this question, but it's really not it shouldn't be nerve-wracking because it's really the interviewer's way of starting the conversation and finding things to ask you about, to talk to you about. And so I wouldn't stress too much over it. I literally just told my story. I said, okay, I was born and raised in Louisiana. I took them through, where I went to college, what I majored in. And then, yeah, I do think it's important to throw in there when it was that I got interested in medicine, like how I got interested in medicine. And you can even throw in, like, I've done this and this activity because I'm particularly interested in pursuing this and this in the future. And so including a little bit more of your goals as well. So it doesn't have to be like this perfect answer. It's just, again, your story. And you can start, like, it's not, what do I say? It's not like, you don't need to worry about sounding like everyone else, because it is like everyone else. You have a story that starts with where you were born and raised and then your goals.
Yeah, I agree. I also started with the where I was born and raised, especially for the schools that applied to. If it was the state that I was born, making sure to mention that I had a, state tie there. Yeah, you don't have to be nervous about it. It's okay if you are. I was. It's my least favorite question still. Just because I feel like I felt a lot of tension about not having a unicorn factor or like some amazing hobby that was like out there and creative. So if you're like me and you don't have amazing, cool hobbies, don't panic. You can still get into medical school. But yeah, so the one thing that I would say to not do is don't try to repeat your personal statement in your tell me about yourself. And don't try to go too far in depth to your why medicine. I've heard mixed reviews about whether or not to bring up the why medicine in the tell me about yourself, even from I went to a couple of sessions when I was in your guys' shoes, where they had some deans. If you guys follow Shone on Instagram, if nobody knows who that is, I'll post her on my story later so you guys can find her, but she's awesome. She does a lot of events like this too. But anyways, some of the deans were like, well, you don't want to mention too much of the medicine in the tell me about yourself, because then the interviewer might be like, oh, did they already cover it? Should I not ask them why medicine? And if you felt you had more to add, you might not get that opportunity.
Awesome, great points. So going to the next question, how should students approach the why medicine question, and what aspects should they really show here?
So for me, I think telling it in a story format is the most powerful and effective. I'm not getting this from a book. I'm just getting it from, my interactions as an applicant and as an interviewer. But really think back to that moment or that time when you were like, yes, I want to go into medicine. This is what I want to do. And craft a story around that. And I think that really is the best way to present the information in a way that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys hear the story thing a lot, and it's so true. And you'll start to notice it in yourself as you go through practicing this and seeing it in this process, or even once you get into med school and do interviewing things are just so much more powerful and interesting. Or even when you get a lesson in class, is it more interesting when you have a list of terms on the slide, or when it's presented to you in a story and a journey type of way? So again, they're just humans. They've been doing this all day. I'm sure Monica can attest to that. It gets a little bit tiring. So yeah, just tell your story. And don't be afraid to, yes, talk about that moment when you really had that, this is it, I know this is it. But don't be afraid to kind of be honest and lead up to it. If it's, oh, I kind of have always wanted to be a doctor, but I didn't really know where that was coming from and I explored it more, that's okay. Whatever your story is, that's what makes it interesting. And yeah, definitely take some time to, you probably already did this in your personal statement, but to write out those key points that you really want to make sure you bring up. And also applying to all these questions, recognize how important body language is, especially on Zoom, even on Zoom, especially on Zoom. Even what you're doing with your face, your facial expressions, smiling, they want to know that you're excited and happy to be there. So just think about that with all of this as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I feel like the Zoom aspect makes things so much harder because people tend to feel really awkward on camera. But honestly, it does take practice. So maybe do some Zoom calls with your friends or something, and practice looking at the camera and talking, and still being natural in that.
Awesome. So what are some good ways to approach the dreaded weakness and strength questions?
Aaron, sorry, I keep starting, so I'll let you start.
Sure. Okay. So weakness and strength also, it's a very unique opportunity for you. And I think, I don't know what Monica will say about this, but we'll say a lot about you as a person, because there are really easy weaknesses and strengths that you can pick, or, you can Google. And this is a moment for you to stand out. Every moment in the interview is a moment for you to stand out. But again, it's a time for some real self-reflection, and it also shows self-awareness, which is really important. So I don't want to give you examples of weaknesses and strengths, because you're all different people and you have your own unique strengths and weaknesses. But I would say do your best to dig deep and be specific. And with the strength question, list it as a strength, but then, add a touch of humility in there. And then same thing, but opposite on the weakness. You don't want to say, well, I'm terrible at studying. That might be a red flag for them. So, just remind yourself of the position that you're going into, and talk about weakness. You do want to add that growth, and you're working on it, but don't make it in a sound, I have a weakness, but I'm working on it, if that makes sense. Like, you want to be as genuine as possible, and what steps specifically have you taken to address that weakness, not just I'm working on it, to say, oh, this is how you answer this question. Just be genuine.
Yeah, very, very important points. So weakness, like Erin said, you don't want to actually give, there is a little bit of crafting to this question, right? You're not being like 100% honest and finding like your worst weakness and telling the interviewer. You're finding one that, yes, you are working on, that you can grow from, but isn't like something that's going to make you a terrible doctor right off the bat. So, and then again, giving that growth story and being as specific as possible is really important, because the more specific you are, the more genuine you sound, because the more real it sounds. And as far as the strength questions, like, go for it. Don't be humble. This is not your time to be humble. You're trying to sell yourself to get into this particular school. So be sure to pick strengths. And there are, I will give a couple of examples, just like broad terms that people are looking for. People are looking for people who are resilient, who are positive, who are team players, who are committed. These are sort of characteristics that schools are looking for, and they're kind of digging through your responses to kind of see if you fit in those buckets. So you can use that to kind of like pinpoint your strengths.
And kind of same thing we said with the other ones. It's not as good to just say, this is my strength. Like, have a story. Why is that your strength? Why do you think it's your strength? Where did that come from? Same thing with the weakness.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we're going to move on to discussing MMI style questions. So this is another aspect of interviews. You might have a traditional one, or an MMI style, or a mix of both. So we're going to discuss a little bit more about those, and I'll pass it over to Erin to talk about more strategies.
So some of the interviews will clearly lay out, we have a traditional interview and we have an MMI. But some interviews will be sneaky and tell you they have a traditional interview, but ask you an MMI style question in your traditional interview. So even if you're looking down your list and you're like, I don't have any MMI interviews, you should prepare a little bit for that. So I want to say, first of all, that with traditional interview questions, I really feel like there isn't one formula or even a general formula for each question that works and you should stick to. That's very unique to you. On the other hand, for MMI style questions, because each scenario is so, I'll address the MMI Zoom in a second. But because each scenario is so unique, and it could be something you've never seen before, never experienced in real life, it can be really helpful to go back into your brain. This is the framework that I'm going to show through. MMI stands for mini mock interview. Yeah, okay. So a traditional interview, I'm just going to distinguish between there two from the chat. Okay, so traditional interview are those questions that we just saw. It's just like any other interview you would have for a job. You're just talking about who are you, why medicine, why this school. They might ask you a couple unique questions like, if you were a fruit, what fruit would you be? And MMI can be the scenarios that you're given, and basically you read about it, and it can have an ethical problem, it can have a moral problem, it can have neither of those. One of them I had was like, you're going to set up a party. How would you set up this party? And it's just, sorry, I keep getting distracted by the chat. It's just they're trying to see how you think about things. They're trying to see how you critically think. Obviously, that's something that's really important in medicine. And they are trying to get a sense of your ethics and morals as well. There are also other MMI style questions where I don't know how it worked on Zoom for those ones. This would be weird, but you would go into a room, for example, and there might be two people there, and one of you would be told, you have to make this other person draw this image, but you can only do it by describing to them what the image is. Something weird like that, where there's no way you can really prepare for it. That would be something to address your teamwork, how you work with others in a situation. Teamwork, obviously, also something very important in healthcare. There could be MMI rooms where you're just kind of like putting Legos together. I don't know. There's some weird scenarios. But so on Zoom, the way they did it is, I don't know how familiar you guys are with Zoom, but sometimes you can go into breakout sessions. So we would be all together for a big general session, and then if an interview had the MMIs, then you would just get switched around. Somebody would come in when it was like 30 seconds to the end, and you would know you only have 30 seconds left then, and then you would get swept off to another room for your next MMI scenario. How long will you know after secondaries if you get, that totally depends on the school. Yeah, some of them, honestly, I'm still getting rejections now, which is like really interesting. So yeah, some schools are better about that. Some schools aren't. That might tell you something about the school, but yeah, okay. So back to the MMIs. The best way to prepare for these is to get a framework. There's lots of good frameworks, lots of resources on Google, lots of resources on YouTube. Dr. Gray's book is really helpful. There's a BMO MMI interview book that I also found really helpful, especially if you're coming into this not even knowing what an MMI is. Those can be really helpful starting points to give you frameworks. They also have tons of example questions and answers. And I really liked BMO because it had initial answer, and then it had, I worked with this person to help them, and this is a better answer. And it's really helpful to see the differences. So one of them is by BMO. They're a pre-med company. It's called, too bad they're not sponsoring me. It's called, I think it's literally just called MMI Interview Prep, but it's BMO, B-E-M-O. So BMO Interview Prep. And then there's Dr. Gray, who's like the med school HQ guy, and his is just an I think it's playbook to the interview or something like that. I don't know. If you put this in Google, hopefully it will come up. What point do you know your chances are diminished of getting in this cycle? That's also a really hard answer. There are people in my class who had gotten into no schools until the week before my school started. So I mean, yeah, that's hard. That's hard to answer. We can go into that a little bit later, but sorry, I'll focus on the MMI now. So we can go to the next slide if you want, so they can see an example.
And someone asked, what kind of info about healthcare system should you know about the MMI? Sometimes they ask healthcare questions like this next one.
Yeah, okay. That's a great question. And I feel like Monica might have a better perspective on this than me, because even going into it, I don't know, what they expected of me really. But so for example, this one, it's talking about a 14-year-old girl who wants birth control, but doesn't want you to tell her parents, assuming you're the physician. So something like this, 14 is really young, but regardless, you might want to mention something like, the first thing I want to do is make sure that I'm aware of like local and state laws to make sure that I'm following protocol. So you don't have to like go out there and memorize all the rules, but just mention that you're thinking about it. As far as in general things you should know about health systems, I mean, you're getting into medicine. You should have a general idea about health systems, about things about insurance and how that works in the United States and maybe is not great. And form a couple of opinions about that because they can and do ask you those questions. They want to know that you're coming into this a little bit aware of what you're getting into. But I'll let Monica give her opinion on that.
Yeah, I was terrified of these types of questions when I was interviewing because I didn't feel like I was well informed in terms of how health systems work and all that stuff. So but I think, Erin, what you said was totally right. You don't necessarily need to know the specifics to be able to answer these questions, as long as you know the principles of like, I do need to look this up. This is one I need to consider. I need to consider her age. Okay, her parents not in the room, things like that. So you understand like the principles of like what you need to consider in a tough situation like this. But as far as like the traditional interviews, I don't think I got a single question on like a health system question or insurance question. And I personally wouldn't ask that because I just think that's cruel because I mean, residents hardly know how insurance works. I mean, it's really tough. But if you were to go above and beyond and you want to prepare, you could just open up, choose whatever newspaper and start reading the health section. And you can do that on a daily basis to kind of catch up on what's going on right now.
Yeah, Monica sounds like an amazing interviewer. Wish she would have interviewed me at some point. But I feel like some interviewers, they try to like test you in a way. They might ask you something they know you don't know, and they just want to see how you react to it. Are you going to pretend to know something that you don't? Are you going to take a moment to think? Are you going to sit there blank faced and panic? Or are you going to say, you know what? I don't know about that, but it sounds really interesting. I'm definitely going to look into it. I think this and that, just again, be honest. They know you don't know these things. Like she said, some of them don't even know these things, but they're more looking.
Sounds like you've had some terrible interviews. Oh my god, that's traumatic.
Yeah, totally depends on the school and really on the individual interview, because you will have interviews also at some schools really like to involve community members. It won't even be somebody who's a part of the school at all. And yeah, it's just they want someone who's going to be able to interact with people in their community. Those are schools that are very community based. Usually small towns, really important to them. I'm not sharing at this moment where I'm going to school just because of certain situations that happen in a social media account that is par for the course. There are some really creepy people. So I have decided to, for now, keep that under wraps. I really wish I could share with you guys because one of the questions was how to answer why this school. And the best thing that you can do, talk to students, find students. Last year, I found students through social media. I would just like look up school hashtags and then like somebody's photo would come up and I'd be like, hello, I'm interviewing for your school. Can you help me? Which was really helpful. And get creative. Also, you could read the school's newspaper and like find out some little tidbits of stuff that other interviewees probably won't know about. There were a couple schools impressed with me. They were like, oh, how'd you know about that? And I'm like, I read the newspaper. So just anything you can do to stand out. Anyway, so for the MMI stuff, the best thing that you can do is practice. And you probably won't end up getting an MMI question that you've seen before, but it's just practicing that framework. Because when you're in that situation, you're a little bit stressed, you're a little bit anxious, you want to be able to go back to, okay, first I'm going to tell them what I need to know first. Then I'm going to make sure that I address like everybody who's a part of this. So for this one, it might be the girl. It might be other physicians. It might be, why does she not want to tell her parents? Is everything okay with her parents? Do I need to be worried about child abuse? You just want to think about everything that's possible, basically showing that you can think globally and you're not just going to be like, well, yeah, like I want to help this girl and I've been there before. So I think I'll just give her the birth control without being like, what do I need to think about? Who do I need to think about? What are the consequences of either decision? Just it's very broad, and I don't know how this works, and I don't know if Monica can tell you because it sounds like her school doesn't do MMI, but what I imagine is that for some of these schools, they have a small rubric that's just like, did they maybe mention these points? But for the most part, they just want to know how you're thinking. They want to know that you're not jumping to conclusions. You might get judgment scenarios. One that I got was, you see a classmate kind of like walking like this, and she has her car keys and she's about to get in her car. What do? Are you going to assume that she's drunk right away and go like accuse her of about to be intoxicated driving? Or what are you going to do? So it's about not jumping to conclusions. It's about showing your critical thinking. And again, those resources I listed, really great. If you don't want to buy anything, tons of stuff on Google, tons of stuff on YouTube. Thank goodness for those people. And work with each other. You're human too. I mean, Zoom with each other, do an MMI question, and tell the other person how that sounded to you. Just practice.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erin. Okay, so I'd love to go over some mock interview tips. Like, do you guys recommend those? Some people were asking, should they pay for them? So, and how to appear confident, especially over Zoom, things like that. I'd love to talk about that.
Oh, I personally think practicing is great because I'm personally an introvert. Especially back then, I was terrible at public speaking. So even that one-on-one, I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? But so I just like practice with friends. I practice with my significant other, like asking questions, and I'm just going to sit there and try to like spit out an answer. And so I felt like much better prepared after doing that. And then also, the more practice you have, the more confident you're going to look, because the more confident you feel after you've done something a million times. I don't personally think that you need to pay for interviews. That's just my opinion. I don't know if Erin has a different one, but I honestly think that the most important thing is to make your response yours and just practice delivering it in a way that sounds confident and sounds real. And I don't know how much paying for someone else to be that interviewer is going to help. I think even just having your friends is good enough.
Yeah, real quick, to be able to address that, I want to tell you guys a smidgen about my story. I graduated from UC Berkeley, and I had a low GPA, and I did a post-bac. I did really good on my MCAT, but I also had nothing like amazing about my application. And I felt a lot of anxiety when I was preparing to med school, and I was really scared. And obviously the process in itself is really expensive, but it's so terrifying. And there's just so many people applying and more people every single year that you feel a lot of pressure to do everything you can. And I will tell you that I did end up spending an egregious amount of money in working with a company who helped me with my activity section and personal statement and gave me one mock interview, and it was not worth it. I got so much better advice from current med students and other people who were willing to help me for free. There was nothing amazing or significant, and this is a big company. I'm not going to call them out, but you don't need to spend money, and you guys already passed that part, but you don't need to spend money for interviews either. These people aren't genius experts, okay? And they're not looking for genius expert response in your interview. They just want to know that you're a cool human who seems like they can talk with people and is caring and wants to take care of patients for the right reasons. Okay, so continuing, mock interviews. There are quite a few Facebook groups that are like pre-med related. There's one that's just for girls. There's one that's general. I will try to find them and maybe send them to you, Sim, so you can send them out to people. But I would just post on there, and people post on there, can anyone mock interview me? And they do. Or if you have any friends who are ahead of you in the cycle, or any clubs that you're a part of your school that have people that you know, they're probably going to be fine doing a mock interview for you. I mean, 30 minutes to an hour of your life to give away to someone to help them is not much at all. So there are people out there who definitely want to help you. I right now am trying to gather some med students through my Instagram that are willing to do mock interviews, and then hopefully I'll be able to send that out to you guys to give people some extra resources for that. But you definitely don't need to pay. And if you're thinking, I need to find this money somehow because if I don't do this, I'm not going to know. No. These are not interview experts. They're just people taking advantage of us at a really vulnerable time when we're really anxious about something we've been working towards our whole life, and they're taking your money. They're not special. No.
Just to throw in another company that we're partnered with, that is also a nonprofit, Prescribe It Forward. They also do mock interviews and pair you with a mentor. So I'll also send that out in an email, and look out for those resources that we'll send out after.
I think I actually interviewed with them. Do they like pair you up with one person who will interview you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I use that resource. Do it.
Okay, awesome. Yep, they're super sweet, and I know the guy who runs it, and he's amazing. So they're definitely a great company to support as well.
Okay, is it all right if I just answer some of the chat questions real quick? Okay, so about the research in the gap year, I did research in my gap year. I did research for 2 years. Schools love that. Okay, well, most of them love it, but if it's a very primary care focused school, maybe they're not as big on it, but most schools love it. And again, the biggest thing is that, first of all, there is a research category on your AMCAS list, so it does count as research. They want physicians who are interested in research. There's a difference between being a physician scientist and a scientist physician. So you have MD PhDs who mostly only do their research, but they have that MD clinical knowledge. And then you have MDs, maybe with masters in science, or maybe in some MD PhDs do most of the clinical work and then have research on the side. They want that. They love that. Most important thing is that you're passionate about the research that you were doing and you can express that. So they love that. So I guess the specific question is MD, but not MD PhD. Again, most MD PhDs end up doing basically just research, and they might have like 1 or 2 clinical days that kind of go correlate with their research, but their big thing is they're in it to do the research. So you don't have to, they're not going to be like, why did you do research if you don't want to be an MD PhD? So just focus on patient-centered care. That's why I want to
I just
be.
want to echo that too, because that's definitely a common misconception. Like, you will do research probably forever if you're in academics. So just because you're an MD doesn't mean you don't do any research. Like, even me, I'm like primarily clinical, but I'm required to submit 2 research papers a year or something like that. So it's actually going to be a big plus for you.
Right. And there are quite a few schools who are very big on research. And so that can be beneficial for you. And most of the times, depending on what specialty you're interested in, you're going to need to do research. So they like that you have that background. So do they ask about your classes or particular grades you got? I was so worried about this. I told you guys I didn't have the best GPA. I was so worried about this. I rehearsed my answer for this question over and over again and got tons of advice on it. And nobody ever asked me. So this is going to be, it depends on the school, depends on the person question. This was most of my interviews, they did have access to my entire application and they still didn't ask me about it. What I've heard is that once you get to the point where they've invited you for an interview, they know you can handle the work of med school. So they don't really care about asking you about your scores anymore. They just want to know who you are and why you're here now. So nobody ever asked me, but if you do get asked, be honest, be accountable, and tell them what you've done to improve and why you're ready for the rigor of med school now.
Yeah, I got that question once, but that wasn't until residency. I didn't actually get it when I was interviewing for medical school, but when I was interviewing residency, I did get it one time, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she actually asked me. But I feel like the thing that they're going for is, one, giving you a chance to explain yourself if you were going through a tough time, like, I don't know, there was a big family thing going on, someone was sick, or you were going through difficult times, and yeah, that impacted your grade. So that, again, that's a chance to, you don't have to get too personal if you don't want to, but at least saying that there was something going on. Or if you did struggle, like my story was, I struggled at the beginning of my medicine rotation in medical school. I didn't know what I was doing, blah, blah, blah. And then I said, this is kind of going back to like the weakness question. I said, I did this and this to work on it. And I'm actually proud of the fact that I was able to get this grade, actually, because I started out pretty poorly, but I was able to bring my grade up by working that much harder. So there are different ways you could address that.
Oh, definitely. Okay, so the how do you find research? So despite going to a very heavy research undergrad, I didn't do any research in undergrad. Basically, what I did was send out like 50 emails to labs that I Googled online, and some people never responded to me. Some people said that they didn't have any space, and one person told me not even that they wanted me, but that they would forward me to somebody else who might. And guess what? Then I got research and I loved it so much. So don't be afraid to, as I was for a long time, to just send out tons of emails. And also, if you're still in school or have any professors you can talk to, just say, hey, like, do you know anyone who's looking for a research assistant? And just know that you might have to put in your due diligence in the beginning, and you might have to, be there for free or volunteer for a while, and then just pray and hope that at some point they start paying you.
Yeah, it's all about the volume. Email people as much as you can, and if you have personal connections, like even better. But Erin, that's such a good point. Oftentimes you'll have to start for free.
And they do ask about your activities. They do ask pointed questions. So know your application, know what you wrote in your application, and be prepared to talk about your activities more, definitely. The type of research does not matter. Again, with research, you want to avoid, okay, here's the thing. You want to avoid the I'm just checking off the checkbox, I'm doing research. So what's best is if you're passionate about the work you're doing. But if you ended up not being passionate about it, you can be honest. You can either say, you know what, I really wanted to try research. I'm proud of myself for trying, but it's not for me, or maybe just this type of research isn't for me, and I would be more interested in XYZ. And yeah, looking for in-person labs. Again, research is not a prerequisite. You do not have to have research to get into medical school unless you're going to a very research heavy focused medical school. So if you don't have research right now and you're panicking, don't panic. You're fine. You're totally fine. And again, it's about finding what you're interested in.
Yeah, the thing I would say about that too is, there is a clear ranking. No one can deny that. Like if you're first author on a paper on a clinical research or like bench work, then yeah, it's going to be like the most impressive. But like Erin said, you guys are so early in your careers that no one is expecting you to have any of that stuff. So as long as you're passionate about the topic, totally agree. As far as the activity breakdown, I wasn't going to plug myself, but I have a YouTube video on that specific topic. So if you just search my name on YouTube, I have a video specifically on how to write your activity descriptions. In the video, I'm mostly talking about for residency applications, but it's literally the exact same thing.
I will definitely have to watch that video when residency comes time. What do you mean by activity breakdown? Do you mean when you're talking about it in an interview, or did you mean for the application section? And when they ask you to describe a time you failed in something, do you recommend to address grades here? Should we use? I would not bring up the grades. If the hardest thing you've gone through in life is get a bad grade, that's, So I was told by many people not to address grades there, for if you're talking about the secondary questions, especially like address a challenge in your life. Don't talk about the grades then. I wouldn't personally. I would try to find something else.
Awesome. So now moving on to talking about more of the virtual interview, how can we prepare for that and stand out, and how can we deal with the home backgrounds and go over the Zoom setting and what to wear?
Oh my God, yes. Please wear professional clothes. It is going to make a terrible impression if you're sitting there in a t-shirt and shorts for an interview.
Wait, I have to know, did anyone you interview not wear professional clothes?
I think, no, I'm not me personally, but I heard from a different interviewer, and it was just like like immediate red flag. So yeah, so even for guys, like, you know, wear that nice dress shirt and tie or whatever, even if you're just sitting in your bedroom. And for the background, I do recommend either having just like a clean background, a wall with shelves is fine, or doing one of those, what do you call it, green screen type things. That's totally fine too, as long as it's not like your messy room. You want to come off as very put together.
Right. I didn't even know I had to mention wear professional clothes, but yes, wear
You'd be
professional clothes.
surprised. There, yeah.
Although
When it comes to virtual,
that's crazy. Although I will admit, my computer was high enough that I was wearing pajama pants. So, you know, I heard lots of
I would
people.
be too nervous. I would that I would accidentally stand up or something.
For me, I was so nervous that I was like, if I wear pajama pants, I'll feel less nervous because it'll be like, oh, this is just a chill. I'm talking to someone. So do what works for you guys. But if you are wearing pajama pants, do not stand up. Oh, yes. Okay. So background, so my camera isn't that great. And this is the computer that I use for interviews, but I just found a white wall in my room and went by it. I was really worried I was going to have bad internet connection because it wasn't good at the time. I also was living in I was living in Oakland in a really noisy area. So I was really worried about that. Everything turned out okay. So just do your best. You know, they know what's going to happen with Zoom now. They've done it once before. So don't worry too much about that. I can't where let me find Noelle. Monica, do you see Noelle's background? She's asking if it
Yeah,
looks
I just put an answer
unprofessional.
in the chat. Like,
Okay.
I don't think it looks unprofessional at all. I just meant don't have, you know, clutter. Like, you know, so clearly a messy bedroom with a bed that's unmade and clothes everywhere.
Right.
That's normally what my room does look like, but you don't want to show that in your interview.
Yeah. Also, I know some people don't have access to the blur out. Like my computer is not able to do any virtual backgrounds because I don't know, I guess it's old. But if you don't have a virtual background, don't worry about that. They're not really worried about your background. They're worried about you. I mean, don't make like a meme your background or something. Don't try to be cute or funny, but don't worry too much. They're paying attention to you.
Yeah, and then the suit jacket question, do you recommend a suit jacket or just a nice clean cut professional shirt? I don't think the suit jacket is completely necessary. I think it's a nice touch, but at the same time, like, do you want to be sweating? I don't know. Sure, it's going to be really hot sitting there in your house in a suit jacket. But as long as your dress shirt is clearly a dress shirt, like, I don't know, there's a collar or something, then that should work just fine.
Okay, awesome. So, what are some good questions to ask the interviewer if they ask, do you have any questions for us?
I can start on this one. I would say that I find many times that people love to talk about themselves. So whatever you can do to engage that person in that is usually good because they feel like you care about them, you're interested in them, and that you value their opinion. So asking things like, why are you at this institution? Or how long have you been here? Like, why do you love it here? Or what advice would you give to me? And also, if you have specific questions about the school, be careful about that because it's okay to ask specific questions, but you don't want to look like you haven't done your research. So if you're going to ask questions about the school, make sure it's not stuff that you can Google or find on their website.
Yeah, although you could say, oh, on your website, I read about this, but can you give me a little more detail? That's one like workaround because I know it is hard
Yes.
to think of questions constantly. Because you will just have a bank of questions in your head that you are going to pull out when you get asked this because like 10 different people are going to ask you, do you have any more questions? Do you have any more questions?
Mm-hmm.
And it feels awkward not to have anything, but by the end of the day, you'll probably have run out.
Yep.
Awesome. So, anything to avoid on interview day?
Personally, I think, especially for virtual interviews, I find that it's even harder for a personality to come through in a virtual interview. So I think the unfortunate truth is that you got to dig deep in yourself. And if you're an introvert, find that little bit of extrovert in you and really let it shine, because, you know, I remember like long awkward silences would be noticeable, or like, you know, the answers would be very like short and clipped, and then I'd be like running out of questions to ask because I'm like, okay, this conversation's really stilted, and I'm looking at the time. So avoiding like just quick short answers, and then having long awkward silences. Try to like strike conversation or give them something to talk about, and just smile. Like, don't just be completely serious face, because that is also going to give a negative impression. You want to come off very personable. So yeah, confident, positive, let everything flow as you're answering questions, and making sure to bring up different points that they can really ask you about, so they don't run out of material themselves.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything she said. Especially that like finding the little extrovert in yourself. I'm a super introverted person. I do not like hanging out with people for fun. But when you're on that interview, yeah, you might be the last interview of their day, you know, and you might be the last interview of their day after 4 months of them doing this. So anything you can do to bring energy to that situation is great. They're going to remember that. They're going to remember how you made them feel. Just like, you know, Monica said she remembered those awkward silences. It probably made her feel awkward. So, you know, I feel like people struggle with interviews because a lot of times you're like, oh, I have to be professional. I have to be like the epitome of whatever I imagine professionalism to be, which is usually a little bit stoic, very like, this is my answer. And it's not. It's having a conversation. It's so much about feeling. They're not robots. You guys can see Monica. Does she look like a robot to you? No. She wants somebody who is professional, and that, you know, they're not being offensive. They came in prepared, but that they're able to have a conversation with someone, and that they're kind of fun. So
Awesome. Cool. Very good things to know. So, is there anything you recommend that students should follow up on after their interview?
I would say that definitely send a thank you letter, even if it's not required. And also write down the names of the people that interviewed you, which is so much easier when you're on Zoom for the thank you letter. But also if you end up going to that school and you have no idea who interviewed you, it's a little bit embarrassing. I've never mailed a thank you letter. Usually you will have like, you guys have probably seen now, a lot of the schools have like these online portals, and usually they'll have a space for you to upload that. Some schools, it was a direct email. Like I was directly emailing with some of my interviewers. But for most of them, it's going to be that portal. Yes, you can ask about the school itself. For example, how involved is it with community work and service? You can definitely ask those things, but try to make your question a little more pointed. I saw that you guys have a free clinic. Can you tell me how involved students are and how early I can get involved? You know, don't just be general, how is it involved with community service? Because that kind of shows you haven't done the work, because they probably do have community service stuff, and it's probably a little bit on their website somewhere.
Yeah, and I agree. Going back to the thank you letters, I think it's a nice touch. I don't think you have to do it, but if you can, why not? It doesn't take that long. But it is an opportunity for you to say, you're my first choice, or, you know, because that can nudge you a little bit, you know, to be like, oh, wow, she really, really wants to come here.
Definitely. I never thought about that before, but that is exciting to hear. So do that, everybody.
Don't say you're the top choice for like, be honest.
What is something good? Oh, so other, you can say, try to remember the things that you talked about. Again, especially if you said, why did you pick this school? Say, I loved hearing about your experience at this school.
Mm-hmm.
X really struck out to me, and I think I would be a great fit here because of Y. So the notes thing's kind of a tricky situation. I'm assuming that when interviews were in person, nobody had notes.
I wouldn't do notes.
For Zoom, I will admit, and I don't think I actually used it, I did have a little sticky note because I was so nervous for my tell me about yourself question that was like, let me remember to do these things. But it was more for me, the process of writing it, that I was like, oh yeah, yeah, it helped me. I think Kristen left, but if anyone else has the same question, a lot of schools will not give you feedback. Some of them will, most of them won't. But I think that honestly, your peers can do a fairly good job at giving you feedback. If anyone's looking for feedback at the end of all this, I'm happy to give you feedback. I and somebody else asked this before too. So I actually applied to med school twice. The first time I applied, I only applied to 10 schools. I don't know why I did that, but I did not get in that time. And I was really nervous and I felt really vulnerable about sharing my personal statement with people. And I didn't have enough people look at my application. And that really hurt me, I think. And so the next time around, I sent it to so many people and I got so much feedback, and that was so helpful. And they had good feedback. And even when they said it, it seemed so obvious to me. Like, why didn't I realize that? So I know it can feel super vulnerable and scary, but if you do get to the end of this and are looking for feedback and schools aren't giving it to you, you can definitely reach out to other people like me. I'm happy to take a look and give you my 2 cents. Let's see.
There
What
was one
else?
question: how many schools should we apply to?
Well, don't apply to just 10 like I did. Okay, so this totally depends on what your application looks like, to be honest with you, and where you live. If you live in Texas, you lucky duck, you're super duper lucky, because Texas, as many of you probably know, really prefers its own people. So if you have a pretty good application and you live in Texas, you might be feeling pretty okay about your shots there. So you're not going to apply to 50 schools. If you're like me and you're from California, and California sends out the most pre-meds and we all look very much alike, and everybody also wants to come to California, then you probably need to up it up. Or if you're like me and you had a low undergrad GPA, then you probably need to apply to a few more schools. So you really just have to look at your application. I would say probably 25 minimum. I know people that have done 50. 50 is really hard once you get to secondaries. I would say maybe 35, 40 is the limit. At that point, if you get to 35, 40 and no one's interested in you, you really have to kind of take a look at yourself and your application and wonder what's going on there. And it's not necessarily a you thing. And it's most of the 90% of the time, it is not a you thing. It might be a your application thing, but it's not a you thing. Medical school applications have a very specific science to them, I have discovered. So don't take it personally.
Awesome. So we do have a few other questions. We can address 1 or 2 of them with the remaining time we have. Maybe, what is the most difficult interview question you had? Or
No, I
feel
already
free to
said
just
mine, being asked about my lower grade.
Probably the hardest, I can't remember the exact context it was said in. I think it might have been about my weakness, but it was like a side question of, and what do your siblings think about that? And it was so unexpected.
That's sweet.
I was just like, I've never thought of that. So that question definitely stumped me, and I was like, like, they also want me to work on it. It was weird. I was really worried after that question, but I got into that school, so it did not end my career.
Yay. Aaron, there's a question that I actually think you would answer better. Would you recommend to reach out to Diversity and Inclusion Dean?
So to be honest with you, I don't think it's ever a bad idea to reach out to anybody, unless the school, like some schools will specifically say, do not contact us, which is a little bit mean. But yeah, I mean, it depends on, why are you reaching out to them? Is it something you're interested in? Is it something you're worried about? Definitely. I feel like the people who are in charge of those committees are very inclusive. So they're probably not going to be like, oh, how dare this person reached out to me. So you could definitely try it. You might not get a response, and don't be, you know, offended or worried if you get a response. That school might have policies about maybe that person is on the admissions committee and they don't want to like bias your chances. And yeah, I honestly don't know.
Would you guys want to tackle any of these questions, or does anyone have any other questions before we wrap up?
I do want to say bottom line in terms of how intimidating our interviews. Your first one is going to be intimidating because you don't know what to expect still. But after you do a couple of interviews, you realize that at least for the traditional ones, I don't know, I didn't do any MMIs, but at least for the traditional ones, you really get into the flow and you realize that they're not that bad. And most people are really nice and most people are just trying to have a conversation. So I don't want you guys to think that this is going to be some terrible, harrowing experience. The vast majority of the people you talk to, hopefully, at least in my experience, should be nice people, and overall just enjoy the interview day.
Yeah, definitely second that. I had a lot of anxiety about that, but it ended up just being a lot of fun. You're really just talking to another person, so it was a lot of fun. I never sent. I sent like 2 letters of intent, and I waited to. I think I only sent the letter of intent if I was waitlisted and I was really interested in that school. So I don't know, maybe Monica can answer that. Should you reach out to schools if it's been a while? No, it's still super duper early. Yes, you will have fun.
Yeah, don't worry. Plus, yeah, I guess. Oh, I feel bad that you guys can't do the traveling part because
I was so glad I saved tons of
That's
money.
true. You do save a ton of money, so I agree. But I did enjoy being forced to travel to all these places.
You'll have a time limit, or you'll have both a time limit and a time gauge for your MMIs, and sometimes they are hella long. You will get that scenario, that last scenario, and it'll be like you have 7 minutes, and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, how am I supposed to talk about this for 7 minutes? And it gets rough sometimes.
Okay, well, to wrap everything up, thank you guys so much for doing this for us. And I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else definitely learned a lot through all of these great conversations. And please follow Erin and Monica. I know Erin gives a lot of great giveaways, and Monica has a lot of funny reels. And just keep in touch, and we'll definitely send out more resources after this session.
Thanks so much for coming, guys. This was really fun, and feel free to DM me or check out my YouTube, send me messages. I'm happy to help however I can.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I had a lot of fun tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. Bye.